Mike was alone in his Houston home, flipping through channels, a dull replacement for the lively conversations that once filled the house. A thud interrupted his reverie. A package had been left at the doorstep. No return address. Odd. He cut through the tape and found a Disney's Frozen Elsa doll. He chuckled. Must be a prank. A doll he didn't order, reminiscent of a simpler time when his kids believed in magic and fairy tales. He placed the Elsa doll on the mantel, between framed pictures of his wife and 2 kids. A family that was no longer whole. Mike was widowed, and his kids moved away, busy with their own lives. The doll seemed to smirk, its blue eyes gleaming in a way that wasn't just due to the overhead light. He shrugged it off and went to bed, but just as he pulled the covers tight, he heard a small, sing-song voice. "Let it go, let it go," echoing down the hall. His heart raced. Dolls can't sing on their own, can they? Mike's house was an old structure, built in the 70s, with dark wood paneling and floral wallpaper that his late wife adored. The air inside was stale, thick with memories and a sense of longing. Each step on the wooden floor was greeted by creaks and moans as if the house itself was lamenting its emptiness. The wallpaper had begun to peel at the edges, and the once vibrant colors had dulled over time, much like Mike's own spirit. Photographs of happier times collected dust on the shelves, taunting him with smiles that felt alien now. The kitchen, once filled with the aroma of home-cooked meals, stood silent, its stove untouched for weeks. Clocks ticked in almost every room, but the passage of time felt meaningless, each second stretching into eternity. In the living room, the fireplace, which used to provide not just warmth but also a kind of emotional comfort, was dark and empty, much like the chair that his wife used to sit in while knitting. The Elsa doll now occupied a space on the mantel, and somehow it felt as though she was absorbing the very essence of the room, making the loneliness even more palpable. The eerie thing was how the doll seemed to catch light unnaturally, even when the room was dark. Its plastic eyes seemed to flicker, as though mirroring the silent lightning of a far-off storm. As the hours ticked by, even the creaks of the house seemed to turn into whispers, as if warning Mike of something insidious. The once familiar surroundings now felt hostile, like a well-known path that inexplicably leads you astray. Mike couldn't shake off the unease. He felt watched, sensed a gathering storm. Yet there was nowhere to escape. He was a prisoner in his own home, haunted not just by a past that refused to let go, but now, seemingly, by a plastic doll with a disarming smile. Mike was a widower in his late 50s, his silver hair and the lines on his face bearing witness to the hard years he'd been through. He had once been a vibrant man, full of life and laughter, but the passing of his wife, Emily, had drained him of his spirit. She was the joy in his life, the reason he woke up every morning, and without her, everything seemed colorless. His children had moved away, busy with their own families, and friends had drifted apart, consumed by their own lives. Thus, he lived in isolation, disconnected from society, and ensnared by loneliness. Emily had always been the social one, the glue that held their family together. She was the one who made friends easily, remembered birthdays, and organized game nights and family outings. Mike was content to let her take the lead, silently appreciating the richness she brought into his life. Her loss had struck him like a sledgehammer, creating a vacuum that was filled only with sorrow and a strange sense of guilt. Could he have been more present, more attentive? Could he have saved her? To distract himself, Mike tried different hobbies. He painted for a while, but the colors seemed dull and lifeless without Emily's approving smile. He took up cooking but lost interest when he had no one to share the meals with. The house became his sanctuary and his prison. The outside world felt too loud, too vibrant, a stark contrast to his internal emptiness. He rarely left home, and the walls seemed to close in on him more each day, as if sharing in his sorrow. He spent his time mostly in the living room, where they had spent countless happy hours together. Mike sensed an odd comfort in the doll's presence. It was as if a piece of Emily's spirit had somehow found a new home within it, providing him a strange but soothing sense of company. However, the comfort started turning into unease. Mike felt like he was betraying Emily by finding solace in something else, something so trivial. His logical side scoffed at the idea, but his emotional side, fragile and unstable, led him to question his sanity. Was he so starved for companionship that even a plastic doll could evoke such strong feelings? With Emily, he had been part of something greater than himself. Now he was just a man in an empty house, questioning his place in the world. The feeling of isolation became magnified, intensified by the weight of the decisions he had to make alone. The Elsa doll was becoming less of a comfort and more of an entity that seemed to accentuate his solitude and amplify the emotions he was desperately trying to keep at bay. Now, it's important to mention that, in a small, dusty corner of the local library, there was a legend that had been passed down from generation to generation. A legend of a book that had the power to grant wishes but came with a terrible cost. Mike had never put much stock in such tales. He considered himself a man of logic, a man who had no room for myths and superstitions. Yet, the tale resurfaced in his mind, uninvited, as he looked at the Elsa doll one quiet evening. In the legend, the book was said to be bound in an unsettling shade of black, adorned with cryptic symbols that would appear to glow under the moonlight. The tale warned of the price each wish demanded. Life would be taken somewhere in the world as payment. The whispers of this story had been so captivating that it led some people in the community to go searching for this mythological artifact, though none ever claimed to have found it. This legend, long buried in the recesses of Mike's memory, was resurrected by the recent oddities in his home. The doll seemed to move on its own, always facing him no matter where he placed it in the room. Lights flickered around it, and the room's temperature would drop noticeably when he got too close to it. The mere thought that the legend and the doll could be connected seemed laughable at first, but the mounting occurrences were becoming harder to ignore. Moreover, he couldn't help but connect the story to the mysterious book that had appeared on his doorstep. Could it be related? Was it all just a coincidence, or was there something more sinister at play? Mike reminded himself that he was a man of science, of logic. He shouldn't jump to conclusions or let his imagination run wild. But as he lay in bed that night, the whispers of the legend filled his mind, blending with the tick-tock of the clock and the creaking of the wooden floors, until it became a cacophony that he could not escape. The legend and the doll, two separate entities, yet merging into one ominous premonition in Mike's mind. The sensation was akin to standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that one false step could lead to an irreversible plunge into the abyss. The room seemed darker than usual, the shadows more menacing, and the Elsa doll sat there, its eyes almost glowing, as if it were a silent observer of his growing dread. He went to bed that night with a sense of impending doom, as if he were a character in a story whose ending was predestined to be tragic. Even in his dreams, the lines between reality and superstition began to blur. The weight of the legend, the unsettling behavior of the doll, and his crippling loneliness seemed to spiral into a vortex, pulling him deeper into a realm of possibilities he had never dared to consider. Weeks passed, and the bizarre happenings escalated. Not only was the Elsa doll perpetually staring at him, but it started to move. Mike would find it in different rooms of the house when he woke up in the morning, even though he distinctly remembered placing it in the attic, behind a locked door. Once, he even found it perched on the kitchen counter next to his morning coffee. He'd had enough. Deciding he'd consult the mysterious book that had arrived weeks ago, he ventured to his dusty old study where he'd left it sitting unopened. When he finally broke the seal and flipped through its parchment pages, his eyes widened. The text was ancient, its symbols arcane, but the drawings? They depicted the doll, its eyes as piercing on the page as they were in real life. Mike decided to delve further into the book's contents. It contained incantations, spells, and rituals, most of which seemed too fantastical to be true. However, desperate and out of options, he decided to try one of them, a spell designed to reveal the truth. The setup was simple. A circle of salt, a single candle, and the object in question, Elsa. Who else? With a trembling hand, he lit the candle and began to recite the incantation. No sooner had he spoken the last syllable than the room plunged into darkness. The only light was the flickering candle on the table, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. The doll's eyes began to glow, illuminating its face with a ghostly light. It was working. Suddenly, the room filled with an ear-piercing cry. The book fell from the table and landed on the floor, its pages flipping wildly as if caught in a gust of wind. The temperature dropped, his breath visible in the freezing air. This wasn't just a doll, and that book wasn't a figment of folklore. They were real, and they were connected. Frozen in disbelief, he watched as words appeared on the book's open page. "Your wish?" it wrote, as though invisible hands were inscribing the words. Mike hesitated. Could this be his chance to undo his loneliness? To fill the void left by his late wife? Emboldened by desperation, he uttered a wish. "I wish to never be alone again." The moment the words left his lips, the room returned to normal. The candle extinguished, the book closed on its own, and the doll, well, it just sat there. Except, its eyes had stopped glowing, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the weight of loneliness lift off his shoulders. It was as if the universe had shifted, albeit imperceptibly. He went to bed that night feeling cautiously optimistic, yet he could not shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The legend, the book, the doll, and now the wish. They were all interwoven in a tapestry of circumstances that seemed too deliberate to be coincidental. As he closed his eyes, Mike felt as though he were teetering on the edge of a precipice, unaware of the free fall that awaited him. Mike woke up to a startling reality. The house was bustling with activity. Neighbors he hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly on his porch, asking about his well-being. A long-lost cousin called, wanting to reconnect. His social media was flooded with messages and friend requests. People were everywhere, in his life, in his home, filling the void he had felt for so long. At first, it was exhilarating. The loneliness that had gripped him seemed to evaporate. But soon, he noticed something unsettling. The people around him were oddly robotic, their smiles a little too fixed, their conversation too scripted. They didn't seem to leave, either. When he tried to get some alone time, someone would invariably appear to strike up a conversation. His wish had come true. He was never alone, but at what cost? As days turned into nights and back to days, Mike's sense of unease grew. The Elsa doll had gone missing, but he had no time to search for it. One evening, he found himself alone for just a moment and took the opportunity to sneak back into his study. He reopened the mysterious book and began to flip through its pages, desperate for an answer. As if guided by some invisible hand, the book opened to a page he had not seen before. On it was a warning. Wishes are debts to be paid. His eyes darted to the bottom of the page, where another line appeared as if written in real time. Your debt is coming due. Just then, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning around, he saw his long-lost cousin, standing eerily still, with the same unnaturally fixed smile. But this time, he saw it, the eyes. They were the same piercing blue as the Elsa doll, glowing in the dim light of the room. Mike's heart sank as he realized the terrible truth. He was surrounded by manifestations of the doll, entities created to fulfill his wish. They were the debt the book spoke of, and the payment was due. In a moment of desperate clarity, Mike grabbed the book and recited an incantation he found in its most forbidden chapter, an incantation to sever the tie between the book, the doll, and himself. As he spoke the final words, the room erupted into chaos. The people, those eerie, doll-like manifestations, screamed and vanished in a cloud of smoke. The book combusted, its pages turning to ash, disappearing into the ether. As the dust settled and the last wisp of smoke curled into the air, Mike felt a momentary sense of relief. He believed he had rid himself of the terrible curse brought on by the book and the haunted Elsa doll. But then, a small, cold hand touched his shoulder, sending a shiver down his spine. He turned around to find the Elsa doll, standing upright on the table behind him, its blue eyes no longer glowing but somehow more lifelike than ever. Suddenly it spoke, its voice eerily similar to that of the little girl he had heard in his dreams. "Thank you for releasing me," it said, "but the lives used to make your wish come true cannot be returned. You see, the book uses human lives as currency. Your wish for company, for people in your life, has been paid for by the lives of others." Mike's heart dropped. The idea that his loneliness, his desperate wish, could cost the lives of others was too dreadful to comprehend. The doll continued, "I was bound to the book, a guardian and a gatekeeper. By freeing me, you've destroyed the book, but the consequences of your actions remain. Those people were once souls, and they've now been lost, consumed by your wish." His face went pale as he realized the magnitude of what he had done. A wish that seemed so simple, so benign, had resulted in irreversible loss. While he had been feeling isolated and lonely, he had never intended for his struggles to cost human lives. The doll seemed to understand the remorse in his eyes and said, "You cannot undo what has been done, but remember this, wishes come with a price, sometimes too terrible to pay." Mike looked at the doll, its gaze almost sympathetic. With a deep breath, he picked it up and walked towards the fireplace. The doll did not resist, its eyes locking onto his one last time before he tossed it into the fire. The flames roared up for a moment, a chilling scream echoing through the room before everything returned to silence. As the fire burnt down to ashes, Mike knew he had severed the last connection to that cursed book, but the weight of his actions hung heavily on him. He sat there for a long time, staring into the dwindling embers, contemplating the irreversible consequences of his choices. While the book and the doll were destroyed, their haunting presence would linger in his life forever. In the days that followed, Mike distanced himself even further from society. He could no longer bear the thought of engaging with people, haunted by the knowledge that his selfish wish had cost human lives. But in that self-imposed exile, he found a sense of purpose. He began researching ancient artifacts and cursed objects, dedicating himself to ensuring that no one else would fall prey to similar traps. Though he managed to destroy the book and the doll, Mike knew he couldn't undo the past. The lives that had been consumed were lost forever, their souls entwined with the book's dark magic. And while he found some semblance of peace in his new mission, the lingering essence of that terrible ordeal remained, a haunting reminder of the cost of his loneliness. Sometimes, late at night, he thought he could still hear the soft singing of the little girl, a chilling lullaby that served as both a cautionary tale and a haunting elegy for the lives lost. And so, Mike lived out his remaining days, a man burdened by regret but driven by purpose, forever haunted yet forever vigilant. The fire in the fireplace seemed to flicker in agreement, a dance of both condemnation and absolution, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold reality of his haunted existence.